Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Republic of Equals, a Manifesto for a Just Society, by Jonathan Rothwell. Narrated by Stephen R. Thorne. Publisher's note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type A Republic of Equals into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page. Then, under the Supplemental Contents section, please enter the access code GREED, and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All figures, tables, and appendices referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. Chapter 1. Behind the Discontent. Our country is in serious trouble, began Donald Trump as he formally announced his candidacy for President of the United States in June 2016. He listed China, Japan, and Mexico as aggressors who are beating us and killing us economically via bad trade agreements. Mexico, meanwhile, is further harming the United States through immigration, he claimed. The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. In remarks that would be much quoted and criticized, he said, "When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people." Trump eventually won 46% of the vote in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. His victory followed significant gains by nationalist parties in the European Union's 2014 parliamentary elections and a shocking vote by the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. In 2017, Marine Le Pen, representing France's National Front Party, won 21.4% of the vote in the first round of France's presidential election, before eventually losing in the second round. The nationalists seem to have two things in common: an insistence that their countries are declining economically and culturally, and the identification of external forces as the reason, with trade and immigration being primary suspects. These views are badly mistaken. But the nationalists have a point about the ill-functioning of the economy, and much of the public shares their sense that something important is wrong with their country's political leadership. This chapter lays out what is wrong and why. Rising income inequality and slow economic growth have been two of the most striking patterns in rich countries during the last 35 years. The explanation is not trade or technological innovation, nor is it mass migration or the rise of global superstars. Rather, countries are becoming more inefficient and unequal because services, which are regulated and controlled by elite associations to the benefit of their members, are taking over the economy, and a small group of elite service providers has managed to secure much of the gains for itself via the gradual accumulation of rights and privileges that elevate this group above markets. Votes of no confidence. In most of the world's richest countries, political discontent reigns. Confidence in government is low and has fallen steadily in recent years. In 2006, 43% of residents living in Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, member countries, the world's 35 richest democracies, expressed confidence in their national government when asked by the Gallup World Poll. By 2016, that already low share had fallen to just 37% of residents. Shockingly, that's lower than the global average of 54%. Confidence has plummeted in a number of countries that have seen a rise in support for nationalist parties or politicians, including Greece, Finland, the United States, Denmark, the United Kingdom, and Austria, figure 1.1. Confidence, which was already low, also fell in France, ahead of a strong second-place finish by the far-right National Front in the presidential election. Just 28% of French residents expressed confidence in 2016. As of this writing, early 2019, a yellow jacket populist movement has upended French politics with massive street protests in response to rising taxes on diesel and, according to reports, rising housing and living expenses. In the United States, confidence is only slightly higher at 30%. On the other hand, low or declining confidence in national government is not inevitable in rich countries. In the Netherlands, confidence increased from 43% to 57%. In Switzerland, confidence went from 63% to 80%. It is also up and relatively high in Canada and Germany. Extreme political parties have not been as successful in these countries, with the exception of Germany, where the far-right Alternative for Germany Party, AfD, has gained traction, reportedly in response to the governing party's acceptance of a large number of refugees. Slow economic growth spread less evenly. Lurking behind the rising discontent has been a major international slowdown in economic growth, or the rate at which living standards increase. The financial crisis that originated in a U.S. housing market bubble certainly had a large negative effect, but the growth slowdown preceded that, and in many ways the housing bubble can be understood as a desperate attempt to find profitable investments in a low-growth world. In 28 of the 30 OECD countries with available data, the rate of growth has been slower from 1980 to 2014 than from 1960 to 1980. New Zealand and Sweden were the only rich democracies to avoid this fate. For the average resident of an OECD country, the annual growth rate in gross domestic product, GDP, per capita slowed from 3.8% between 1960 and 1980 to 2.1% between 1980 and 2014. This can't be attributed to the aging baby boomers dropping out of the labor force. Growth has also slowed on a per-worker basis, from 3.5% to 1.9%, figure 1.2. From 2008 to 2014, annual growth has been particularly weak, just above 1% in either per capita or per-worker terms. Productivity growth, the fundamental source of long-run living standards, has slowed. This means an entire generation has now come of age in a less dynamic society than the one experienced by its parents' generation. Partly because of the Great Recession, growth since 2008 has been particularly weak, but the slowdown started even before then. Slow growth, it must be said, is not a disaster. It is much better than no increase in living standards, or even worse, a decline. For most rich countries, living standards have continued to improve. Yet, this minimal progress has been undermined by a disturbing trend, famously documented by the French economist Thomas Piketty and his collaborators. The earlier robust round of growth, after World War II, occurred under conditions of falling income inequality, while the latest round has coincided with rising income inequality. From 1980 to 2014, the richest 1% of taxpayers took home a larger share of national income in every rich country with comparable data. Figure 1.3. Modest growth, combined with high inequality, results in little to no gains for substantial portions of the population. This can be seen for the United States, which by all accounts stands out as one of the most unequal developed countries in the world and has become more unequal over the last 40 years. The economists Piketty, Saez, and Zuckman have used tax records and other public sources to trace where income growth has gone in the United States. From 1980 to 2014, the share of income going to the top 1% doubled from 10 to 20%, while the bottom 50% of taxpayers, those with taxable income at or below the median, saw their share fall from 20% to 13%. Average pre-tax real income for this group increased by only 1% from 1980 to 2014. The middle distribution, those between the 50th and 90th percentiles, saw a 42% increase, but most of the gains went to the top 10% of income earners. Overall, the weak growth in income for those outside the very top make it difficult to accumulate wealth, according to the data from Piketty and collaborators. In 1980, the bottom half of the distribution had a meager $3,405 in average wealth in 2014 U.S. dollars. Wealth for this group peaked in 1992 around $7,000 and declined thereafter, even turning negative during the Great Recession. As of 2014, average wealth was just $349 for this group. More recent data from the Survey of Consumer Finances, analyzed by economist Edward Wolff, shows the same pattern: zero increase in wealth for households in the middle of the wealth distribution. For the median U.S. household, wealth was $78,000 in 2016 compared to $80,000 in 1983 in inflation-adjusted dollars. Even as overall income growth stagnated for the bottom half of earners, there were notable changes across income sources. The weak positive growth didn't come from taxable labor income, which is the kind of income that shows up in bank accounts and can be readily used for spending. That fell by nearly 10% from 1980 to 2014 for the bottom 50% of U.S. adults. These losses were offset by gains in tax-exempt labor income from health care and retirement benefits, with modest growth from capital gains associated with home ownership. Thomas Piketty, Emmanuel Saez, and Gabriel Zucman put it directly: the bottom half of the adult population has thus been shut off from economic growth for over 40 years, and the modest increase in their post-tax income has been absorbed by increased health spending. The falling share of income going to this group has important implications for living standards. If their 1980 income share and economic growth had both been unchanged, a big assumption, no doubt, then the bottom 50% of Americans would have earned $26,000 on average in 2014, instead of only $16,000. Here's another way to think about the scale of the change in inequality. Divide the U.S. adult population in half. Tell the poorest half that they all need to pay $10,000 every year to the richest 1% of Americans, those with annual taxable incomes of roughly $300,000 or more. For many reasons, the same people won't be on the top or bottom every year. For example, income typically rises with age until just before retirement. Still, regardless of who they are in any given year, the rich and poor used to be much closer together, and economic growth used to raise living standards more evenly across income groups. Indeed, Piketty, Saez, and Zucman's data show that income growth was higher for lower income groups than it was for the rich in the decades preceding 1980. The basic point is simple. Economic growth is less effective at raising the living standards of the masses when income inequality is high, and a small slice of elites reap a huge chunk of the gains. That is likely to strike many people as unfair. Accordingly, levels of confidence in national government could be explained in large part by looking at both growth and income inequality. Between 2006 and 2016, confidence did not increase in any of the 16 OECD countries that score below average on recent growth, figure 1.4. The places with low growth and high inequality saw the largest drop in confidence, 15 percentage points on average. The United Kingdom's Brexit vote occurred under slow growth, high inequality conditions. However, it was also the case that poor performance on either inequality or growth was generally associated with flagging confidence in government. Thus, confidence fell in France during a period of low growth and low inequality, whereas Donald Trump was elected President of the United States with above-average growth and inequality. Meanwhile, confidence in government rose in countries with high growth and low inequality by 5 percentage points. This describes Sweden and Germany. At the individual level, there is also a very strong correlation between income, financial security, and feelings toward government within OECD countries. When it comes to predicting their confidence in government or approval of national leaders, people's feelings about their income are far more important than their actual income, or even rank within society. Gallup World Poll has several items that capture financial anxiety, including whether economic conditions in the respondent's local area are getting better or worse, and whether or not the respondent is living comfortably off his or her household income or having difficulty making ends meet. The relative income of an individual's household has a small effect in the expected direction. Lower income individuals are a bit less satisfied with the national government and its specific leader. Top quintile households hold confidence or approval ratings roughly 4 percentage points higher than bottom quintile households. Those with lower education also tend to be somewhat less confident in their governments. Yet, income and education are incomplete measures of financial security. Subjective judgments pick up nuances that are specific to an individual's life circumstances, including wealth, debts, the strength of supportive family ties, expectations for the near future, and political views that may bias their interpretation of the economy. More anxious individuals are much less satisfied with government. A standard deviation increase in financial anxiety predicts a 16 and 18 percentage point drop in approval and confidence, respectively. The upshot is that even middle-class and affluent households are likely to turn against a government when they feel their financial conditions are becoming difficult, particularly if others seem to be gaining at their expense and they are dissatisfied with their living standard. Rising inequality and slow growth make that dissatisfaction more likely. I agree with a number of scholars who have argued that slow growth in an unequal society is corrosive to politics, but the details of the argument are important. Rising inequality in a growing society might come from superstar innovators, entrepreneurs, and performers, and one might argue they deserve to be rich because their skills generate value for everyone. Yet while that has happened, it does not accurately describe the last several decades, which have been characterized by low growth. The actual circumstances of weak growth and rising disparity indicate that something is fundamentally out of sorts. It may be that the process that leads to slow growth is making a small elite rich and hindering opportunities for a wide swath of the population. Thus, figuring out the causes of both slow growth and rising inequality has enormous implications for what, if anything, can be done about them. The nationalist explanations. Blame the foreigners. Nationalists on the right, like Donald Trump, blame trade and immigration for impoverishing the middle class. By nationalists, I mean those who view the world as a conflict between citizens of a national community, usually thought of as those who have ancestral roots going back at least several generations in a country, and everyone else. Trump and some of his allies are also populists in the sense that they view elites, whether in business, culture, or academia, as hostile to common citizens. By contrast, left-wing populists, like U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, evince similar skepticism toward trade and immigration, and likewise view elites, capitalists, as acting against the interest of common citizens, workers, but do not suggest the conflict is rooted in ethnic or national identity, and so are not nationalists. I have some sympathy with populist complaints about elite influence on the economy, as the book will discuss, but I believe that both of these perspectives fundamentally misidentify the core problems. Start with the populists and trade. Across rich countries, the share of workers employed in the manufacturing sector has declined for two reasons: Automation, machines, do much of the work once performed by human hands, and much of the work that still is more efficiently done by humans can be done far more cheaply in developing or middle-income countries like China, Poland, Mexico, and Turkey. Trade is certainly an important contributor to industrial decline in developed countries. By comparing employment changes across countries and networked groups of countries, commuting zones, economists have estimated that trade with China is responsible for roughly 1/4 of the 5 million net job losses in the U.S. manufacturing sector from 1991 to 2011. These losses also appear to have led to a decline in the incomes of manufacturing workers, as they took pay cuts or worked fewer hours. For the average American manufacturing worker, the best available estimate of the impact of trade competition on individual wages for workers in highly exposed industries is a reduction of just over $1,000 per year over the period from 1992 to 2007. Yet the news isn't all bad. Chinese imports, which ramped up dramatically in the 2000s, did not coincide with a reduced risk of unemployment for manufacturing sector workers relative to workers in other industries that were not exposed to import competition, but did face intense domestic competition. By some measures, like risk of layoff or short job tenure, it was actually safer to be a manufacturing worker over the last 15 years than a worker in retail, construction, or even professional services. More importantly, only about 1 in 20 Americans work in manufacturing, and even fewer in the industries that compete directly with China. The vast majority of working and middle-class Americans have benefited from cheaper imports, often disproportionately, because Chinese imports tend to compete on the mass market, think Walmart, rather than on the market for luxury goods. On balance, it's likely that imports from China have lowered income inequality by disproportionately boosting the spending power of lower-income Americans, as Christian Brodus and John Romales concluded after a careful study of consumption data, which proves that trade with China raised the spending power of the U.S. working class, and, to a great extent, all U.S. residents. The same point can be made by looking at consumption data by income group from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Families in the middle of the income distribution spent more than their after-tax income, which implies they borrowed money to meet expenses. Meanwhile, families in the 90th percentile saved 24% of their after-tax income and so benefited proportionately less than lower-income families from falling prices for goods. It is easy to see how this connects to trade. Middle-income families spent 25% of their after-tax income on food, clothing, and automobiles. Families in the top 90th percentile spend just 15% of their income on these things. These goods, along with computers and cell phones, which have seen massive price declines, are precisely the industries most exposed to import competition. In this way, mass imports have resulted in a progressive redistribution of purchasing power. Without imports, inequality would be worse. The economic effects of immigration are more complicated, but there are no logical or empirical grounds for linking immigration to the rising share of income going to the rich. In general, immigrant labor has probably resulted in lower incomes for people working in the occupations most exposed to immigrant competition, such as construction workers, restaurant workers, cleaners, and childcare workers, though even this finding is disputed with strong empirical evidence from specific cases assembled by Michael Clemens and Jennifer Hunt, for example. In any case, economists tend to agree that most Americans, including most of the middle and working classes, have seen net benefits, and that is the view of a recent comprehensive analysis from a committee of experts at the National Academies. The benefits of immigration come primarily from two channels: greater spending from immigrants, which stimulates local demand for goods and services, and lower prices for services provided by immigrant entrepreneurs and workers, Immigrants, of course, also frequently start businesses and contribute to innovation, culture, and scientific advances. There, the benefits are harder to quantify, but are nonetheless important. In these ways, all but a small segment of America's middle and working classes have been enriched, at least somewhat, through mass immigration. The selective immigration of highly educated workers and entrepreneurs through student or skills visas, for example, has been an even more obvious benefit to the average American. The downsides of mass migration are not trivial, but are not likely to have led to the rise in top income shares. George Borjas, an economist at Harvard, has assembled evidence over decades of research showing that mass immigration has lowered wages of other immigrants and U.S.-born workers with less than a high school diploma, a small share of the population. That finding has been disputed, but it, at least, has clear logic behind it in that employers can reduce wages when many new workers enter the labor market. Even so, the estimated effects are small. The large wage gap between elite professional workers or business owners and those with less than a high school diploma cannot be explained by immigration, and most estimates suggest that U.S. workers with moderate levels of education saw long-run wage benefits from mass immigration. Aside from creating wage pressure on other less educated workers, many immigrant workers with low levels of education consume more in government benefits than they pay in taxes over their lifetimes, creating fiscal budgetary challenges. Yet one could say the same about U.S.-born Americans with low levels of education, as the National Academy's report shows. The fact is that undereducated immigrants are a lower fiscal burden than undereducated U.S.-born residents. For both populations, the net effect reflects, in part, the fact that the U.S. government typically runs a large budget deficit for political reasons entirely unrelated to immigration. If one makes the reasonable assumption that an additional immigrant does not increase the costs of pure public goods, like national defense, then the average immigrant, especially those with higher educational levels, has had a net positive effect on government finances. The favorable long-term effects of immigration are consistent with the most comprehensive analysis ever of intergenerational mobility. Using data from millions of tax records and the census, economists from Harvard and the Census Bureau found that Hispanics living in the United States have high rates of relative intergenerational income mobility, such that incomes are converging with non-Hispanic white people. The children of Asian immigrants, meanwhile, are earning more as adults than non-Hispanic white children raised with similar family incomes. Neither an increase in immigrants from Latin America nor an increase in imports from China can explain the rise of incomes at the top. As we will hear, people in the manufacturing sector, including the executives who would have benefited the most from offshoring production, make up a tiny fraction of the 1%. Likewise, immigrants lacking college degrees rarely comprise a substantial share of workers at the international corporations that pay top executives, nor at hedge funds, law firms, and physicians' offices. Data across rich democracies tell the same story. OECD countries that are more exposed to immigration or trade are no more unequal and no more likely to have become more unequal since 1980. Whether one measures exposure to immigration as the foreign-born share of population in 2015, or the change in the foreign-born share from 1990 to 2015, neither is significantly correlated with the level and change in the top 1%'s income shares. Trade exposure can be measured in a variety of ways. For example, average tariff rates, the trade balance as a share of GDP, changes in the trade balance, or a trade freedom index. But none of them is even moderately correlated with the level or change in the top 1%'s income shares, except that countries with higher tariff rates, and hence less exposure to globalization, have significantly higher inequality. the conventional left-leaning view.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?